The wind howled across the plains like a living thing, clawing at her coat, tearing through the thin wool until her bones felt like glass. Snow lashed her face sideways, each step heavier than the last, her boots soaked, her toes numb, her breath shallow and burning. Christmas Eve was supposed to be warm, full of candles and laughter. Not a frozen death march across ranch land no one would remember her dying on. She had lost the road an hour ago, or maybe more. Time had stopped making sense. When her fingers stopped feeling like they belonged to her, all she knew was that if she stopped walking, she would lie down and never get back up again. That terrified her more than the cold. She whispered prayers she hadn't spoken since she was a child, bargaining with God in broken breaths. Then, through the white blur, she saw it. A house, a ranch house, lights glowing faintly like a miracle she didn't deserve. She stumbled toward it, fell once, crawled, stood again, every step driven by panic and hope. When she reached the porch, she collapsed against the door and knocked with what little strength she had left. The door opened slowly and warm light spilled out like heaven itself. A tall man stood there, broad-shouldered, silent, his face hardened by years of weather and solitude. He took one look at her blue lips, shaking body, and instinctively reached for her, but stopped. His eyes narrowed. "You shouldn't be here," he said. Her knees buckled. She grabbed his coat, desperate, tears freezing on her lashes. "Please," she whispered. "I'll die out there." He hesitated, only a second longer before pulling her inside, slamming the door against the storm. The warmth hit her so hard she sobbed. He sat her by the fire, wrapped her in blankets, pressed hot coffee into her trembling hands. He asked no questions, not yet. When her shaking finally slowed, reality returned. She was alone with a man she didn't know in the middle of nowhere, on Christmas Eve. And he looked like a man who lived by strict rules. "You can stay until morning," he said finally. Relief flooded her until she shook her head. "They'll find me," she said softly. His jaw tightened. "Who?" she swallowed. "The men who sold me." Silence filled the room heavier than the storm outside. He stared at the fire, then at her. "You can't stay here," he said again, quieter now. Panic surged through her chest. She slid off the chair and knelt before him. Pride shattered, fear louder than shame. "Then let me stay as your wife," she begged. His breath caught. Outside, the wind screamed. Inside, everything changed. The words hung between them like smoke that refused to clear. Wife. He hadn't heard that word spoken about him in years. Not since the grave with her name carved too deep into stone. He turned away, anger and grief warring inside his chest. Marriage wasn't shelter. It wasn't protection. It was a promise he'd already failed once. But when he looked back at her, kneeling, shaking, eyes red with terror, he knew sending her away would be a death sentence. He helped her up gently, his rough hands careful, as if she might break. "You don't know what you're asking," he said. She met his gaze, voice steady now. "I know exactly what happens if I leave." Outside, hoofbeats echoed faintly in the distance, swallowed by snow. His instincts screamed. He closed the shutters, locked the door, and handed her a ring he hadn't touched in years. "If you're staying," he said, voice low, "then we do this right." By morning, the ranch woke to rumors. A frozen stranger, a sudden wife. Men who came asking questions found a married woman at his side, and a rancher with a rifle in his hands. Christmas Day passed quietly, but danger lingered like smoke after fire. That night, as she sat beside him, fear softened into something else. Gratitude, safety, maybe even love. He told her the truth about his past, his loss, why he lived alone. She told him hers, how she'd been traded, chased, nearly erased. When the men returned at dawn, they found more than resistance. They found a man who had something to protect again. The confrontation was swift, final, and when it ended, the snow looked cleaner somehow. Months later, spring thawed the land. The marriage that began as survival turned real in quiet ways. Shared meals, shared work, shared silence that felt like peace. On another cold evening, she stood on the porch, no longer afraid of the wind. He wrapped his coat around her shoulders. "You saved me," he said. She smiled. "No," she answered softly. "You let me stay." If you want more powerful Wild West love stories where survival turns into devotion, Subscribe to the channel now. The next story might be even more unforgettable.